Whoa, 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 yeah, we are in the place to be, yeah, 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 yeah,
All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. It is May 16th and it's 8:30, so it's time for the Kirk Anderson Show. And today I have a special guest. Susan, tell me your last name, just so I don't
Yeah,
mess it up.
sure. Sure, bad key.
That's how I was going to say it, but I mess up a lot. So, Susan Badtke is with me today, and we're going to be talking about housing. And of course, as we get going on the topic of housing, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them into the comment section on Facebook, and we'll add them to the show and try and answer them. And be sure to give a shout out as well. Before we get started, I just wanted to take just a little bit of time to introduce my guest or have her introduce herself, talk a little bit about what she does with the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission and why they pick such a long name. That's a huge acronym, but they play a very important role in Wisconsin. So, Susan, just take a moment to say hello and introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me to be on your show today, Kirk. I appreciate it. My name is Susan Badtke, and I am a senior planner with the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. It is a very long name. It was really given to us. Regional planning commissions are we were created by Wisconsin statute. So the Wisconsin state legislation created us. There are 9 of us throughout the state. Essentially, regional planning commissions serve as community development organizations. So in our region, in West Central Wisconsin, we serve 7 counties, including Polk County. Polk County is one of our member counties, and really, our goal and our purpose, as defined by legislation, is really to assist our counties to advocate, partner, serve our counties and the communities. So we do that through different data research, studies, grant. We can assist with grant applications, and really we work in different service areas of economic development, transportation, community development, natural resources, and mapping. So those are really our prime areas that we cover. With Polk County, we've partnered with them on many projects. One of them is the Polk County Housing Study, and so happy to be here today to talk about housing.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, Dryden Wire and Ben Dryden, they are up in Spooner, which is kind of in that Washburn area, but his coverage area tends to be Barron, Polk, and kind of central around there. So he's got a pretty big reach. I'm in Polk County in St. Croix Falls, and so we're going to talk a little bit about Polk. But the study that you did for Polk County, was that also done in those other areas as well?
Yeah, yep. So Barron County also has a housing study. They actually were the first county that we partnered with on housing studies. Their economic development director, Representative Dave Armstrong, now
Mm-hmm.
really saw a need for housing. He said, "We have a workforce, we have jobs available, but we don't have anywhere for these folks to live." And that's really what led Barron County to the study. And then Polk County saw that similar need from an economic development workforce standpoint. And so Polk County was the second county that we worked with on housing studies. And recently, within the last year, worked with Dunn County, so further to the south,
Mm-hmm.
on a housing study as well.
So how similar are the housing studies data amongst the counties? Is there a wide variety just because of economics, or are you seeing a trend that kind of follows Western Wisconsin?
Yeah, I would say there's a trend that follows Western Wisconsin. St. Croix County is a little unique, right? They have a large growth and a lot of growth pressure. So a little every study, every county has unique challenges, but in general, you're seeing an aging population, and you're seeing smaller household sizes, and that's really nationwide. So
Hmm.
aging, smaller households, we need more housing units. Not enough housing being built to accommodate those additional households.
Yeah. So some of the challenges that that St. Croix Falls, where I live and where I'm the mayor, some of those challenges are really being relevant or becoming relevant and ringing very true to the study that you presented. Specifically, the workforce. We have a lot of jobs that need to be filled, a lot of industrial park jobs or our hospital, just a lot of need for people to come work here. And a lot of the conversation is around where do these workers live? And so that is a challenge. And then there's not a lot of space for development in some of the areas, particularly around St. Croix Falls. There's where we can build. There tends to be some building happening, but there's also the challenge that the cost of building or creating housing has right now gotten kind of out of a lot of people's affordability. And so you do address a little bit of that and talk about some creative ways, as well as getting the cities and the state involved. And so hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. Can you give just a little bit of an overview of what the challenges are from the study that you did and your perspective on why we're in the situation we're in? It didn't seem like 10 years ago that housing was that big of a crunch, but suddenly now it's a big deal. So how did we get
Yeah.
here, and what's the actual issue?
Yeah, so the study, what we like to do is first look at demographics, economics. Where are we at? We know that Polk County is a growing population. It's growing in population. Now, 2010 to 2020, it was about 1.7% increase over the last 20 years. From 2000 to 2020, about 9% growth. So you have a growing population, you have an aging population, and that really puts constraints. Many of the research that has been done by folks at Forward Analytics, they're a research arm of the League of Municipalities. Many of the older folks, because of the rising interest rates, are choosing to actually stay in their homes longer. And
Hmm.
so they're not leaving. They're not, their single family homes are remaining occupied. And we also, because of the many factors, but increased cost of building construction, municipal infrastructure, labor costs have all gone up. And so you're just not seeing as much housing being created. And so for those folks that are looking to enter the community, it's really a struggle to find a place to live. So we look at demographics, we look at economics, what's your housing supply? So in Polk County from 2010 to 2020, there wasn't a lot of new housing being constructed. That's per the census data. Those numbers show that. And so when you have older generations that are staying in their homes longer, not freeing up homes, it puts and you don't have new construction coming on the market. It really constrains that housing market.
Yeah. Well, we have right now. It's obviously the end of the school year. I just attended my daughter's kind of graduation ceremony-ish type thing last night, and we had probably 60 local graduates at this ceremony from different schools. It wasn't with the school; it was with churches. But they all raised their hand that they're going to either go in the military, they're going to go into the workforce, maybe a trade school or college. But eventually, all those new workers are going to need a place to land, and I don't know where they will land if they wanted to live in St. Croix Falls. And it's a challenge. I have a unique perspective because as a firefighter, I get called to medical calls, and many times, I had 3 yesterday, with people that were aged, very nice people, but they were at that place where they probably should start looking for some assistance, and maybe don't have the ability to take care of their lawn, don't have the ability to get up and down stairs as easy, and so they're becoming more reliant on helpers that come in weekly, or medical calls when they fall and they can't get up, type of thing. I've asked them politely, have you considered this? And much of their conversation is, we can't afford it. There's not a place to move into, because we do have senior housing in St. Croix Falls, and I know that throughout Polk County we have senior housing, but it's based on your income. And so they don't have market rate necessarily, unless you want to live in a condominium. But if you want to live in more of an apartment where everything's taken care of, if you make too much money, or were responsible and have have any type of money, you don't qualify. And so if they were to move out of it and sell their house, they feel like they're compromising what they can give their kids. They'll be a burden, and yet they don't have any income to stay, and it's becoming dangerous. So
Sure.
this study was kind of utilized by the Polk County Economic Development Corporation, and I think you presented at some of those as well, to talk about how do we create housing for seniors so that they feel comfortable moving into a new market rate or affordable senior housing, which would then free up those other houses for new workers, for new college graduates that want to raise their family in our communities, things like that, so that the seniors don't have to leave and go to Forest Lake or to a nursing facility or something someplace else, that they really want to stay here. They grew up and brought their family up here. So what kind of recommendations do you have for that situation?
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent comment. And I would say what you said, it really echoes what was heard during the study. So, as part of the study, conducted interviews, had housing forums where we invited the public to come and, provide feedback as to what they see there as the biggest needs. And for that aging population, it's really looking for alternative housing that is that single level, low maintenance type of housing. Many folks pointed to the condominiums in St. Croix Falls. I believe it's out by the industrial park. And they said those, when they never come on the market because they're always sold, never listed, and they want to see more of that. Now that's not for everyone, but those types of housing products for which we probably could use more of, really relate to both the aging population and the younger population. Those low maintenance kind of single level entry or downsizing types of units. It could be renter, could be owner occupied. And what that does, to your point, that does, it frees up if you can shift and balance the market, if you can move some of those aging folks out of their single family home. If it's at the right price point, and B, if it's available, because I think those are two important things. You don't have those units per se, and it's not, you talked about the affordability and their incomes, but if you can shift those folks out, free up a unit, maybe that unit actually is a larger single family home, that then someone from who's in a starter home, it might take many transitions, but a starter home they might be looking for a move up home.
Right.
They could then relocate, and then that starter home frees up. Maybe it's someone who's currently renting, has been saving for a starter home, they can then transition. So you might see many moves in order, and it takes time, right, to actually see that effect. But I think I would say in terms of recommendations, number one is planning. So I think planning, and it's probably because I do a lot of community planning, I'm very passionate about it. It's a municipality really needs to plan and look ahead. Where do you want growth to occur? What type of growth do you want to see? Where do you want residential development to take place? Where are you targeting these things? And also being mindful that it's not just about building housing, right? We're trying
Right.
to keep folks in our community. It's about quality of life, amenities, and services for the aging population. So St. Croix Falls, you're blessed. You have a medical center there, and a lot of services, but it's about looking at the whole picture comprehensively. Where do you want housing to occur? And then I would say, what you have your housing study, we have demand numbers. It's about, marketing that, working with developers. It's not easy. It takes time, but it's about, these are our needs. This is what
Yeah.
we're trying to attract. Exploring what the community can bring to the table, whether that's some dollars from tax increment financing districts that you have in place that you can capture. One of the tools municipalities has is to extend the life of a tax increment district for a year, use it towards affordable housing, and then also look at other programs. So there's a whole, WEDA, Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. They have several housing programs, loan programs specifically for, either low income or workforce housing type of projects. So I guess that's kind of the steps. I think the first thing is really planning. Where do you want, what do you need?
Yeah.
Where is it going to, you talked about the lack of land available for development. Well, perhaps that's important. You need land available in order to meet your demand projections.
Yeah. And I think that the land has become available. I mean, some people are holding on to land
Sure.
that could be developed, and so at some point it may be developed, similar to our tiny house community, which was kind of an alternative or unique way to use housing that's attached to a larger piece of property that's within the city, but
Okay.
the individual who owns it has chosen not to develop it at this point, and so in the future we expect that it probably will have
Sure.
some development on it. Currently, right now, the big challenge that I think we face as a municipality, saying, "Hey, we want to bring in, senior housing, or we want to bring in market rate housing," is twofold. One is the interest rates on building costs are very expensive, and so when we've talked to developers who had some interest in building, say, a 30 or 40 unit senior housing unit, they said, "Look, we can't build it and then charge the rent that is quote unquote affordable at these rates, and so we either need some assistance from the state or from some grants or some creative funding to bring that price down so that seniors will be able to afford to move in it." Because quite frankly, if they're living in a paid-for house and all they're paying for is their taxes, it is going to cost more for them to move into a new apartment when the rents are $1,500 to $2,500. That's just not sustainable. So that's one challenge. And then whenever we try and implement housing in a specific area, there's always seems to be pushback from the people who live in that area, and we call it NIMBY, not my backyard, but we tried to develop some housing along a piece of property along the river. That created way more controversy than we thought it would, and that development did not go through. Our tiny house village, before that started up, there was a small piece of property that was owned by the same owner, and she wanted to put in some smaller units they would blend in well, but they are smaller. They didn't meet code and would need some special considerations. The neighborhood did not want that, and what they ended up getting was a 5-acre tiny house village, which turned out beautifully, and I think nobody's frustrated with it, but there was just a lot of concern. And then affordable housing, we have an affordable housing development going forward right now, and the neighbors aren't particularly supportive of it because they think that affordable housing brings in potential crime, it might bring in drugs, it's going to affect their property, and so there's not a lot of support for that. So even where we could build, it seems like people don't always support it, and maybe it's just marketing, how to get people to buy into it. But we have this need, but people aren't always on board with it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on those types of things, but
Sure.
those are some of the challenges that I've been facing as mayor.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Your first challenge that you identified, the funding, right?
Yeah.
And I would say, yeah, it is difficult to make the numbers work. I'm certain of that. I'm not a developer. I'm not a builder, so I haven't run the math. Oftentimes, what I hear, multiple funding sources are needed, right? They call it the capital stack, where you're layering different sources just to make a project pencil out. Again, I'd go back to getting, not that it's creative, but utilizing and working with, especially WHEDA, Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. They administer low income housing tax credit programs, and
Yep.
that's low income. But what we saw, and I think you alluded to this when you talked about your example of the woman maybe that you saw yesterday in the senior household, where she doesn't have incomes low enough to qualify for those low income senior housing units, but also not, she doesn't have incomes high enough to meet market rate. So it's this group in the middle. What has been, and yes, she's a senior, but it's really, workforce incomes, right? So
Hmm.
not low income incomes, not market rate, but that workforce group, your entry level students that are going to land somewhere. You want to keep them in St. Croix Falls, but how do you have housing that they can afford to live here without, staying with mom and dad for a while, right?
Right.
Um, and so WHEDA did, and actually the legislature, passed in 2023 a bipartisan housing legislation that did create some workforce housing loan programs. And so I would encourage, communities in the county, in the region, to take a look at those programs. There are some requirements of communities. They have to have a comprehensive plan. And that's why I say
Hmm.
planning is so important. That is one of the requirements, that you be in compliance with that you've updated your housing element. You have your housing study. So that certainly is a good, has a lot of that information. But I would suggest, reaching out to partners and trying to find those pieces, and it takes time to find all of those. I'm sure you've heard that,
Hmm.
working with developers and builders, it's finding those funding sources. But it is a challenge, and there's no magic solution other than trying to find funding to help fill that gap.
Yeah.
Um, as it relates to the neighbors and the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard, you alluded to marketing. I would say a lot of it is education, and you're not going to get everyone on board, but we do tend to gravitate towards that we're most familiar with, which is larger single family, homes, maybe some duplexes. But it is, folks do get a little scared when there's something new, or that they're unfamiliar with. Now, on the river, of course, I'm sure there were other factors that came into play: natural resources, open space, view sheds, all of those things.
Oh
But
yeah.
just generally speaking, tiny homes. What? Why are we doing that? That's new. That's not something. And kudos to the city of St. Croix Falls for amending your zoning ordinances. Trying something new, and now showcasing that it's working, right? It's a
Yeah.
new housing product that you brought in. But I think education. I think, one of the the stigma really is around the word affordable, right? It has
Right.
a bad connotation. It's you're bringing in, like you said, crime into our community. But at the end of the day, everyone, what's affordable to me, Kirk, is very different than what's affordable to you. We all want to have housing that's affordable for us. And one of the things that we did as part of the housing studies was during the housing forums, show the top occupations in the county,
Mm-hmm.
and what the annual median wages were for those top occupations.
Right.
Your entry level teachers, your police officers, your that are just starting out. What are their wages? What can they afford for housing? And I think it then gives people an idea of, these are our neighbors, our friends. We're trying to create a place so that our kids can come and live here and work here and help meet the workforce needs in the community. So much of it, I think, does come to the education.
I think the median house cost has gone up substantially. I know that St. Croix Falls is going through this year a reevaluation of our property values, and the expectation. There's a lot of nervousness around it, but the expectation is that as everybody's property values go up, our mill rate will go down and it will equalize, and so it shouldn't be drastically a big spike. Yes, your value went up, but our budget didn't necessarily go up, so we're not going to cause you to pay a bunch more taxes. Some people it will, some people will go down maybe, but across the board, a new person coming out of college, starting a family and looking at buying their first house, or coming off of that starter house to a 3-bedroom house or something like that, it's a little bit of sticker shock for those individuals. My wife and I lived in a smaller house for 15 years before we bought our house in St. Croix Falls, and we have 5 kids. Our house value has gone up where 5 years ago we would not have bought it, quite frankly, just because of the cost. So it's a sticker shock, and I don't know how kids like mine who are going to graduate college and want to buy a house are going to be able to afford it. Now, I will say that the amount of money that kids are getting paid out of college for some of the jobs that they're able to get if they use their degree do tend to be higher paying. So there is, they have more to work with as well. But I'm not wanting my kids to live in my basement for the next 20 years. And I think a lot of parents are facing that, where they're having to have their kids come back to either help them or vice versa. They may be coming back to help mom and dad because of costs or health or whatever it is. So those are some of the challenges.
And those challenges, it's not unique to Polk County, right?
Yeah.
I'm in Eau Claire County. In my neighborhood, I have a neighbor, their daughter and her partner. They want to buy a house, and they just graduated college. Guess what? They stopped renting, moved back in with mom and dad so they can save money for a year or two and then have that down payment. So that's what unfortunately many folks are having to do.
Yeah, 20% down is you really have to save a little bit more.
For sure.
It might be another $30,000 or $40,000. So
yeah, and from 2020 to 2023, so that 3-year period, the median sale price of a home in Polk County went up by 37%. And as you were mentioning, and it's probably continued to go up even more so in 2024. And when we look at incomes have not, when you look over time, incomes haven't kept up. They might be increasing, but they certainly haven't kept up to the rate that housing costs have gone up.
Yeah. And typically I think you see the best increase in your salary when you start at a new position rather than waiting for those raises over a period of 5 or 10 years. So the new kids coming out of college that are starting in a technical field or a medical field, they're going to be offered more than someone who's maybe been sitting there, whether that's fair or not. I just know that seeing some of the job offers that my nieces and nephews are getting. They're they're very healthy,
Sure.
but they also have a lot to pay
Mm-hmm.
for housing and things like that. So you talked a little bit about population growth and just some of the numbers. What's the expectation as we look towards, the population growth in Polk County or in Western Wisconsin, and then also how does that affect in comparison to the housing? What is it going to look like?
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. So as I mentioned, you have seen Polk County has seen some growth, about 9% over the last 20 years from 2010 to 2020. When we look at projections, so the Wisconsin Department of Administration, they are kind of maintain official population projections. However, their last population projections were prepared in 2013 following the 2010 decennial census.
Mm-hmm.
So we used those in the 2020 study because that's the best source of data that we had. However, since then, the 2020 decennial census, that 10-year complete count census, was released. And so we were able to take a look at that and see where things lined up as it relates to DOA's projections and what we saw on the ground through the 2020 census. So, what I saw was I think, in seeing where the county was at in 2020 for population compared to their projections, I think that, my take was that their projections were a little bit high based on what we saw in 2020. So I prepared some alternative population projections for the county, still continued growth, but not, not as high as what was originally prepared in 2013 by the state. But ultimately, what we see, is out to 2035, continued growth. But then at 2040, you're seeing those baby boomers, those folks born 1946 to 64, they're going to be exiting the population. So then you don't
That's
have
a nice way to say.
yes, they're exiting the population. And so then you start to see actually a little bit of decline. And that's true of most of our counties. The state projected that from 2010 to 2040, the 65 and over age group would increase in population by 93%. So again, they're making up a significant part of that population increase in the county and in the state. So we do see population continuing to increase out to 2035. So how that we then use that to kind of factor in households, to project out households. So looking at, we know that we're increasing population, smaller household sizes, which equals we do have more households. So increase in households, but smaller household sizes. So then when we project out and try to look at demand, we by 2035, you'll need about countywide what I'm projecting, and no projection is science, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I caution it based on the population projections that I prepared. That you'll need about in total about 2,200 to 2,400 additional housing units in the county. So that's,
Okay.
we're talking 10 years out. We're already 2024. So there is some significant need and demand for housing in the county.
Do you follow the building permits or how many are actually being built and to see if that's happening? I know in St. Croix Falls in the last several years, we've had a builder who's built a number of homes, and that's helped in our economic growth for the city. But it's nowhere near 2,200. So hopefully other cities are doing the same.
Yeah, and excellent point, Kirk. One of the things that I note in my projections is it doesn't account for any new residential units that have been added to the county since 2020, because 2020 is when the census, what we used, we didn't go and collect data from every community as part of this update.
Yeah.
As part of the original study, we did, and we factored those in, but in the updated projection. So if there's been housing that's been constructed since 2020, you would reduce that 2,200 to 2,400 by whatever the number of housing units that have been built since 2020.
So in general, I think we look at censuses as fairly accurate, although the 2020 census happened during COVID and nobody wanted to go door to door. So is there
Yeah.
any question on whether or not those numbers are truly accurate? And we do have other factors to consider. We have a lot of immigration that is sometimes undocumented, so we may have
Sure.
inflated numbers of people who just aren't going to answer the door, and yet they're needing housing as well, or taking up housing as well.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea if it's truly inaccurate or how inaccurate they think it might be?
In terms of the census numbers,
Mm-hmm.
so in terms of the census numbers, it's the best source of data that we have
Yeah.
as it relates to population, housing units, median income. So yes, there are some concerns that those numbers, might be off. But it's the best source of information, and it's supposed to be the complete count. The census does undertake annually the American Community Survey. So that's another data source, and that is what we relied on for much of the data that was included in the 2020 study. So that original study that we worked with Polk County on. The challenge with that is their estimates. So it's a average sample survey over 5 years. So some folks get it, some folks don't. It's not that complete count. And the challenge is for many communities, and even at a rural county level, if it can be, there often can be a large margin of error.
Right.
And so, we prefer to use the decennial census because, again, that's supposed to be the complete count. So at this point, that's the best source of data that we have. That's likely, I'm guessing, the source of data that DOA will use to do their population projections and household projections as
Right.
well. So it's the data that we have to go off of. I guess I can't speak to necessarily the
Accuracy.
shortcomings of the quality of data, but that's the best source that we have to
Yeah.
work with.
When I don't remember, I'm sure my wife filled out something, but nobody came and knocked at her door. I think we filled something out and sent it in. And
Sure.
it's no longer do we do the handwritten go door to door and you fill it out. I've had to look up some survey or some census information from the 40s, and you can look right down the street and see mom, dad, all the kids, ages, and it's pretty interesting
Sure.
how much work that is and how many people do that.
Right.
Um,
I would note one more thing on this, Kirk, and that, we do want to be careful, though, and I would give caution. So while I say 2,200 to 2,400 new housing units is what I'm projecting out to 2035, as I mentioned, by 2040, your population is going to start to decrease, right?
right.
The baby boomers exiting. So what it's a balance, and you do need to continue to watch that the numbers, the demographic changes because of the building construction, because what you don't want to have is then an overbuilding and too
Right.
many units. And so there's no good, I don't have a good solution or an answer to that question. We need housing units now, but
Mhm.
in the future, we might not have as much of demand. So I just note that you do need to consider that as you're moving forward with growth and development, and be mindful of that.
Yeah. So we have a mutual friend, Neil Klein, who's with Family Friendly Workplace, and he's
Mhm.
utilized a lot of what you've done in this study into some of the studies he's doing on workforce. And his numbers are a little scary as it relates to the number of new people coming into the workforce versus the people that are exiting. And Polk County, Barron County, probably most of us in this area are seeing the same trend, that at some point we're going to have less people coming in to the workforce than are leaving. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the empty jobs and a lot of unfilled positions. And people, I don't even know that it's people that don't want to work. It's just we have less people. And COVID certainly pushed a lot of people to retire faster than normal. But how do you think that will affect the need for housing? People still need a place to live, but maybe it won't be workforce. Maybe it'll be more affordable if they're not working. Or how do you see that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that Neil at Family Friendly Workplaces is trying to do is also look at it from a community perspective. How can we make our communities family friendly in an effort to bring folks from other places into Polk County, into St. Croix County, into the region, right, to fill some of the workforce needs. So he's looking at it from a kind of a marketing perspective. How can we, it's hard to market yourself and hard to recruit people to live here without the housing.
Yeah,
and I think, that's his, so I think housing, it's still going to be needed, especially if you do want to recruit and attract folks to fill those jobs, to increase that workforce number, and get more bodies here in the county to fill those jobs. But you have to also be mindful and watch those numbers and not overbuild.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of that. It may be that people are just working remotely, and so they're working from home. But we are recruiting a lot of people from the cities who, whether it's just because they can or because they're tired of everything going on in the commute. But more and more people are coming to Polk County or to other counties and working locally, which is good. And but there's still a lot of empty jobs, and I think it'll be interesting to watch how that works. I don't want to keep things longer than it has to go, but I want to talk to you about how communities can do different things. I mentioned the tiny house, which was a zoning reform, and we made exceptions in our zoning for that particular project. There's other things that you recommend municipalities considering, not always popular with the next door neighbors, but ways for us to, in this, I don't know if we call it a crisis, but in some areas it's definitely a crisis. I know in California there's absolutely no housing, and so they're doing some interesting things that you mentioned, like backyard lots, secondary dwelling units, and things like that. What are some things that you would maybe encourage the municipalities to consider opening the door to that has not been a popular thing as of yet?
Sure. Yeah. So a few things I would say, zoning, and you mentioned City of St. Croix Falls and the zoning reform that it took to allow for tiny homes. Zoning really is the regulatory tool to implement your plan. So we talked about comprehensive planning and communities undertaking that planning, and then you really need to take a look at your zoning ordinance. Review it, do a zoning yield. So how many housing units can you get under your current ordinance? Does your zoning ordinance allow for the types of units that you're looking to have for both current and future development areas? And if you can't build the number of units that you need or that you're looking to have, how do you look to change your zoning to accommodate that? So a few things that communities can consider when they're looking at their zoning ordinances: look at your lot standards. So how large of lots are you requiring? And that really informs how many units you can have on an acre, right? So do you require a quarter acre lot? Do you require 10,000 square feet? Would you consider reducing that to 8,000 square feet? So take a look, and there's not a one size fits fits all approach to communities, but I would encourage you to do that. Look at your parking requirements. Those can add costs to housing. Consider other types of residential dwelling. So the tiny homes or missing middle, which could be, I have an example of what looks like a single family home, but it's actually 4 dwelling units in one building. So, and with that, you can have design standards. So it fits into the context of a neighborhood, right? You don't want to change the character of a neighborhood, but maybe allowing or encouraging some gentle density. Maybe it's not a single family home, but you're allowing 2 units in there, a upper unit and a lower unit. Consider accessory dwelling units. So some folks know those as granny flats or mother-in-law suites. Those can either be attached or detached units. Oftentimes they might be found above a garage. So it's a dwelling unit that's in the upper level of a garage. You could rent that out. Maybe it's an entry-level workforce person that's renting that out as a means of housing that's affordable for their incomes. And then I would say, are there unnecessary regulations? Many of the zoning ordinances were developed years ago, and maybe some of the standards or the rules and the processes aren't really in place. So take a look, understand your ordinance, and evaluate them. Remove anything that's unnecessary or challenging for developers. Talk to the developers, talk to your builders. Where are the hurdles? Where are kind of those sticky points that they have in working with your ordinance? I did point out to many. There is the Wisconsin Builders Association, working with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, put out a really excellent resource that I would consider or encourage municipalities to take a look at. It's called Enabling Better Places, a user's guide to Wisconsin neighborhood affordability. And it walks through many of these things that I mentioned. And so if you're interested in more details, I would, on zoning reform, I would encourage you to take a look at that resource. But then also, what's your development process? So if there's a 40-acre piece of land, you could see that I'm interested in developing it. Who do I go and talk to in your community? Right. What's the process? What's the infrastructure? Is there water, sewer? Who pays for those extensions? What approvals do I need? What's my timelines? And so I think that that's a very important piece. And often communities, many of the communities in Polk County, Barron County, if they're smaller community, now I know City of St. Croix Falls is fortunate you have a city administrator that can work through that process, but oftentimes it falls on a local clerk to share that information amongst all their other duties, and to know all of the ins and outs of development can get a little bit cumbersome at times. So trying to I suggest, maybe even consider putting together just a short development guide. If I'm looking to develop residential housing, what do I need to know? Who do I contact to get more information on the steps in the process? And then making sure that person knows the steps and the requirements too, right? And they're so that it's clear.
20 years. So exactly. Right.
Exactly.
I could see where a packet that you could just give to a developer when they come in and say, the first thing I want to do is welcome you and say, we're very interested. Here's a packet of information with all the contact information. Let's set up a meeting and take it from there. But a lot of times it's, who do you talk to? And we get that with funding. And I just send them to Terry Hauer at Polk County EDC and say, talk to him. He's the expert. And then we can sit down together. But having that welcome packet for new residents or developer packet or new businesses. We're trying to court new businesses into St. Croix. Why are we making them do all the work? We should be marketing ourselves to them to get them here.
The easier you can make it for them to navigate the process and understand, ordinances, they're used to those things. Developers, they're used to it. But the easier you can make it for them, it puts you at a competitive advantage, right? Because if you make it easy, the next county, the next community doesn't have that. They're more likely maybe to consider because you're helping them through the process and you're supporting them through it.
Yeah. You mentioned TIF financing. St. Croix Falls, we just started a TIF for our downtown, and we closed a very successful TIF a couple years ago, there's still communities that aren't taking advantage of that, which is kind of surprising because of the benefits of it. Other than a TIF, which it took me a lot of time to figure out what that is. I'm not going to be able to explain it very well, but you're diverting taxes that would go to the different county, school, city, and tech schools, and keeping them in the community, and then you can use those to build infrastructure or help with financing in a specific area, as long as it raises taxes. So in a nutshell, that's a really good way to encourage developers to come in. If you can lift some of the burdens of their financing and spread it out over 20 years. The county, Polk County, has a financing package. I don't know if it was from ARPA funds or how they came up with that package, but you can get a very low interest rate. I don't even know if there is an interest rate, but it's not a huge amount, but it's $75,000. It could take care of some of the some of the starter costs, and it's just one of those levels of financing that are on there. And then talk to your local utilities. Sometimes Excel or Polk Burnett, or they might have rebates or grants or things for specific types of buildings if you use certain types of energy efficient type things. And then people like Terry Hauer or his counterparts in other economic development corporations, they have a wealth of knowledge of all of the funding that could be available and can give you the packet to make it easy and even walk you through it. What other resources would you suggest to find out more about how do we build this and how do we afford it?
Sure. So I mean, in terms of the financing, it's, TIF really is your prime financing tool, in addition to the other funding programs through state or federal agencies, right? So I mentioned WIDA with an H. Again, they have different types of loan programs that, and I would encourage, if you do have a project and you're interested, you can always reach out to me, especially if you're looking at one of the WIDA programs. I could put you in contact with our regional rep and help coordinate or facilitate that, and at least get you in contact with them if a municipality and developers working on a project. I would note, as part of the 2020 study, we did put together what we called our Polk County Housing Toolbox. And it is available. I know that Terry has that on the EDC's website. It's linked there, a PDF, and that provides a whole host of different tools or strategies for communities to consider. Now, things change, so these other unique workforce housing programs through WIDA weren't around in 2020. They're a new program, so things do change, but many of the programs, the tools are in there. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. The Polk County, and I think that $75,000 you mentioned, that Municipal Housing Partnership Program. So it's a unique opportunity. Polk County really, kudos to the county for, setting those dollars aside. I think that they've had at least 2 applications. Those are either grants or loans. I don't know enough about the specifics, but Terry or the county would have that information.
You have to pay them back, but I think
you have to pay them back. Okay, so very
low interest, if no interest.
Yeah. Yep. So it's it's actually zero interest loan.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I thought.
Zero interest loan, and it's loans to municipalities for certain types of housing programs or projects. So if you're a municipality, think about how you might be able to use some of those dollars and work with the county to capture some of that to help move your projects forward.
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard of it specifically. I'm sure it's happened, but there's a company in Milltown, Schaefer Manufacturing, and they just announced that they were going to build a daycare center. And I would imagine they're doing it because so many of their employees have this need for daycare. Sure. And they're going to build it and run it and provide high quality care for their employees' kids. Don't know the structure of it, if it costs or if it's a benefit or how they're going to do it. But have you ever heard of like employers investing in in the building of housing for their employees so that they can kind of kick it off themselves to make sure that they have that available.
Yeah, there's a few examples of, employer assisted housing, and there's a few different ways you can go about it. So, Home Sweet Menominee in Dunn County, City of Menominee, is one program where local employers, the City of Menominee, Greater Menominee Development Corporation, and the Community Foundation of Dunn County. So, you had many players come together,
Hmm.
and they created a down payment assistance program called Home Sweet Menominee, where if you are employed by one of the participating employers, you could then get a 0% loan up to $10,000 to, as down payment for a home in the city of Menominee. So those folks said, let's get our employees to actually buy, and hopefully that keeps them here in the community, and helps our community as well by having them as stable, stable folks in the community. So that has had good success. When I last reached out to them, the challenge is there isn't housing available for folks
Hmm.
to use the program for
Right.
down payment. So that's a challenge. But that's one example of an employer assisted housing program. Abbey Land Foods over in Curtis, Wisconsin, so over in Clark County, that's another example. They built apartment buildings for workers to help address that housing shortage, and the housing needs for their employees as well. You could also look at providing just financial incentives, or perhaps the employer actually, well, like Abbey Land Foods, builds those housing units themselves. So there are a few examples of employer assisted housing programs.
Hmm. Well, as we kind of conclude our show today, I want to encourage municipalities, if you're a mayor or a town chairman or a village president, to reach out to people like Susan, and whether it's to get information on who else to reach out to, but start putting your feelers out there to find out how you can bring additional housing, or reuse current infrastructure. There might be a building in your town that is laying vacant that could be repurposed for housing, and it may take some creative implementation of zoning, or other programs to make that happen. But there are ways to do that and open up the doors for new residents, for workforce, maybe allow seniors to do a transfer of an existing 3-bedroom house that they raise their kids in into something that they don't have to maintain, and open that up. So there's lots of different ways to do that. Susan, can you give your contact information of where people can reach out to you, and any other entities that you would encourage them to check out?
Yeah, sure. So, again, our organization, West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, our website, if you Google us, you can find our website, my contact information, our office number. You'll find all of that on our website, WCWRPC.org. So hopefully you can find us. I would also note one last thing, Kirk. Next Thursday, so May 23rd. So I have been partnering with the county EDC. They invited me to participate along with Family Friendly Workplaces and Derrick Building Solutions,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll be holding a third. So we held two kind of seminars, I guess, on workforce and housing in Amory and Osceola, and there was excellent turnout. There will be a third session May 23rd in Luck.
Mm-hmm.
So take a look. The EDC has that information. So if you are interested in getting more, I'll get into more of the nitty gritty of some more tools and things like that. You mentioned adaptive, reusing an old building. I could provide some examples, and I certainly will go into more detail during that presentation. But feel free to join us again. It's at the Luck School. I think it starts at 7:30. So take a
Mm-hmm.
look at the EDC. But again, our website, WCWRPC.org. And I'm happy to connect you with other resources as well.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody who can to get up to Luck to do that. I went to that seminar in Osceola, and the three different speakers really provided extremely valuable information, and it just gives you kind of a renewed sense of purpose for doing this and why. And some of the challenges. It's also a great networking event because the people that are going to be there are the ones that are facing similar challenges, and you might be able to collaborate and come up with some great ideas for doing that. So with that, I want to just thank you, Susan, for being a part of today's show. We could have just put up slides and done a presentation, but it was fun to have a conversation back and forth about the issues that we're facing. There's not one solution. There's a lot of creative things that we all have to kind of consider and take into account. And so as we face that together, I hope people will be creative, reach out for help where they can, and encourage their communities to continue to grow and move forward as we push Wisconsin forward. So with that, thanks for being part of the show, and thanks everyone for participating. You can check this replay out on drydenwire.com and YouTube and Facebook if you'd like to share it with someone else. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.